Good Monday morning. I'm Chris Nee. I'm going to be hosting this episode of On the Bench, which is brought to you by Chattanooga Whiskey. If you're a whiskey fan, go try it. If you haven't had it, let us know what you think. And if you got any questions about it, reach out to Brendan. He's one that knows the most of all of us. But Zach is becoming a quick learner himself as he's enjoying the bottle.
What's that supposed to mean?
So this show will be myself, Brendan, and Zach. And we're going to talk about the first scrimmage, which was held on Saturday inside Doak Campbell. It was the sixth practice of the spring. Involved in that, obviously, FSU had, 30 to 50 kids on campus roughly. We'll also get into that. So first things first, how are you guys doing this morning?
Doing great, Christopher. Thank you for asking.
I'm alive, I'm vibrant, and I'm ready.
I'm not sure about the vibrant part. I'm just being honest with you here.
What does that
mean?
Chris,
how are you doing? No one asked you that. How are you?
I'm great, other than my power flickered at like 8:50, and I had a moment of uh-oh.
There was just Chris, for the people watching, I'm like 10 minutes from Chris, but we're kind of on the same side of town here. And I just saw a bunch of electric trucks go out by me too. My power flicked about 10 minutes ago too. So they're doing something. So this may all be
well.
May crash.
The good news is we may be like rolling, putting together one of the best podcasts ever, and it just ends abruptly in the middle. So if that happens, it is what it is, and we're still going to upload it either way. All right, enough of that. Into the scrimmage. We covered the heck out of it on Saturday. Mike Norvell, all of the coordinators, spoke afterwards. We had notes immediately after Mike Norvell concluded speaking of stuff we were told about it. And obviously a lot of that was echoed by what Mike Norvell and the coordinator said. So I'll start with you, Brendan. What's your number one takeaway from what we learned about on Saturday with regards to when they got in the stadium, got after it in a game-like situational? It was a situational scrimmage to lay groundwork for folks.
It was, and some of that means putting the offense and defense in challenging situations, specifically the offense. They backed them up a few times and try to see how those guys did. And the big takeaway for me, Chris, and this is after talking to various sources as well as the coaches basically said this. I think Mike Norvell used the phrase dominant, and I fully believe that it was a dominant performance by the defensive front, which isn't too much of a deviation from what we've seen in person through the first 5 practices of the spring, right? Like the defensive line has been really good. And it seems like it was just a continuation of that on Saturday. Heard a variety of names. Patrick Payton, coach sang his praises afterwards. Fabian Lovett, I don't know how much he went. I think he went a little bit on Saturday, but he's been great so far this spring. Josh Farmer is a name that I was told did fantastic on Saturday, and that followed in line with what he did well on Thursday's practice as well. So a lot of different guys step up each and every day, it seems like, and that is a testament to the depth FSU has on the defensive line, as well as probably a reminder that defense is usually going to be further ahead of the offense the first week and a half, 2 weeks of a camp. Usually that's not atypical. And FSU also on Saturday operating without a couple of projected stars on the offensive line, as well as no Jordan Travis. So take it all with a grain of salt, but it sounds like the pieces on the defensive line that we've seen so far through the first few practices of the spring kind of did what they were expected to do on Saturday.
Yeah, a couple comments that came out from the coaches talking about it was one, I can't recall if it was Mike Norvell or defensive coordinator Adam Fuller, but one of them referenced the expectation, the intention of having multiple defensive tackles on the field, more than 2 at a given time at certain times in certain packages. None of that is surprising. We referenced that when they were recruiting guys like Braden Fisk out of the portal, but it's good to hear them say it. It's good to know it's going to exist. They kind of did that in reverse last year with defensive ends, using a number of them on the field together. And I don't think they're going to go away from that. I think it's just going to allow them to be a little bit more multiple to kind of mess with opponents in different ways. On the Patrick Payton tidbit, he was a guy that was talked about by Norvell, Fuller, as well as special teams coordinator and defensive ends coach John Papuchis, who's his positional coach, about how much he's just developing. And namely the development is in the run game. He's becoming a stronger, more physical player, and every down defensive end, not solely viewed as an electric speed pass rush end kind of guy. Zach, one thing I always find interesting, I know you were really consumed by recruiting during the scrimmage portion, but I always find it interesting when recruits that get to watch the scrimmage talk about it. So there were a couple of defensive linemen here. Elias Rudolph comes to mind, now at Deerfield Beach from Ohio, FSU commitment, Jamori Flagg from Miami, South Florida area. They were both here. What did they kind of say about what the defensive line did on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, well, I didn't know this, but Jamori Flagg is actually, I guess, related to Patrick Payton. So he noted
Really?
it on him, of course, and that was pretty cool to learn. And he just talked about his dominant performance, and obviously that was echoed by the coaching staff afterwards, and just how improved of a player Pat Payton has been over the past year and 2 years, really. Just crazy development there. But yeah, that was a player of note. They mentioned some of the interior defensive linemen. Honestly, can't remember exact players that they mentioned, but Pat Payton was definitely one that was mentioned by multiple guys.
Yeah, I think Rudolph's comment was something along the lines of they just really get after it. Like he was very impressed by how the defensive line is so active. I just always find it interesting because those guys are kind of coming in with a clean view of it all. They haven't heard all the preseason talk or the spring talk. They haven't heard the narratives per se, and they just kind of give you that singular moment view, and it's always interesting to me. All right, so if the D line is doing great, that means the O line isn't doing great, right? Isn't that how this all works? If you get
Typically.
turnovers, it means the offense is struggling. If the offense is scoring touchdowns, it means the defense is struggling.
Chris, if Adam Fuller's watching this, takeaways, not turnovers.
Takeaways, yes. I'm sorry, Adam. I'm sorry. I usually lead that charge for you, buddy, for the brand. So O line, what do we make of it? What's some of the footnotes that need to be included when talking about what the O line did on Saturday?
So real quick before I go to the O line, can I throw one more thing on Patrick Payton?
Sure.
I know we've talked about him a little bit, but I would love to. Never mind. Moving on to the offensive line. I was told, talking to a source this weekend, that he was a quote unquote terror rushing the quarterback over the weekend on Saturday. And Chris mentioned some of the run stopping ability, and I just want to shine a little bit of light on a rep that he had on Thursday. It was early on in team drills, I think. Third down drills. But regardless, there was something where FSU was trying to do a counter, some kind of pulling action with its offensive lineman to get outside, to get Trey Benson to bounce outside. And Patrick Payton was so violent in how he set the edge and so powerful that he was able to take one offensive lineman and just halt him completely. And it causes basically this 3-car pileup where the other offensive lineman pulling got jarred back, or he got jarred the guy he hit into the other offensive lineman pulling. And that then led him into falling into Trey Benson. And the play pretty much just ended there because the defense was able to rally to it. But that's the kind of play. And yes, it's a singular play. But that's what FSU coaches are talking about when they're saying that he's getting stronger and more developed as a run stopper and a more complete player. We know he has pass rush moves. He does a lot of really fun things that frankly, I think kind of surprise his fellow teammates and coaches alike with some of the agility and bend that he brings to the table. But him showing these signs and the wingspan, and at 6'5" for him to do it at that size is what's so impressive. The fact that he's getting stronger, more functional strength, and it's showing up. That's a really good sign for FSU, especially with the future of Derek McClendon being kind of up in the air. And I do, just on a side note too, I'm not totally convinced that some of the love, they are making sure they show love to Patrick Payton. I'm not getting this from anyone inside the program. This is just me connecting dots. I think a little of that's to put some pressure on Derek McClendon as well, as he's kind of up in the air right now. So, but Patrick Payton is doing extremely well. On the offensive line, Chris, when one unit is doing great, another one isn't. Typically, is how that works in practice. A few things, though, that I think for context, as we talk about and then decipher the offensive line here. Number one, during the scrimmage, I don't know how active Maurice Smith was, and we know that Robert Scott's limited. So those are two guys who are probably going to factor into your starting lineup in 2023 that aren't going. I mean, center and left tackle, presumably, and those are the two most important positions on the offensive line. You're without him. So that's a starting point. Casey Roddick, he's talked about trying to learn some center. I think FSU ultimately is going to put him at guard. That's just my projection. Seeing him play at guard, you're like, oh, yes, that's what it's supposed to look like. But they want to push Maurice Smith, and they want to have a guy who's capable at center in case something happens to Maurice Smith. Is snapping important to you? But he's just a few practices into learning center and did it in a full-bore scrimmage this weekend. Maybe not a great sign of or a great indication of what he can be. It's a tough way to evaluate him. Did hear that Keandre Jones struggled a little bit in the scrimmage. So far through the practice, we've been able to see his good is really good. His bad leads to some unwarranted pressures, and he just has to get a little quicker, a little better. Heard really good praise on Darius Washington, just very solid. Bless Harris sounded like he did all right too, still working himself back into game shape after missing last year. So a lot of the issues I think were happening internally for the offensive line. But again, that makes sense. You're still kind of figuring out what's going to happen with Dimitri Emmanuel and his waiver. You have injuries that you're kind of dealing with too. So, yeah, some good, some bad on the offensive line. But again, that's not atypical this early on in a camp.
Yeah, and Alex Atkins added context to it too. There was a good bit of mix and match, which Brendan alluded to. There's a couple guys, Wes Harris, for example, Keandre Jones, I believe, falls in this category, who are dealing with some ailments or coming off of some things that are going to limit their full potential of what they ultimately can be, should be for this team. I'm not overly concerned with the O-line. I think the depth's as good as FSU's had on that bunch in a decade. And I think they're going to figure out their best five and then their next five. And it's a rare occasion where FSU actually has a full next five, but they're going to in this bunch. So I'm not all that worried about it. And also, they don't have all their pieces right now. And it's also about, and I understand, like, when the bullets fly, guys get hurt and somebody has to be inserted. But there is something to when a guy knows how to go on his left shoulder and his right shoulder play. There's a continuity to it, a gelling, and that doesn't happen 5-6 practices in, especially when 3 of your key pieces are new transfers getting used to it, and Jeremiah Byers, Roddick, and Jones. So something worth keeping an eye on. Zach, you got anything on O-line you want to add, or on to the next?
On to the next.
All right, well, most important position on the football field, quarterbacks. QB1 for FSU, Jordan Travis. Everybody knows that. He sat out. That was by plan. That was what Mike Norvell intended to do. He shared that with the media during practice last week, and we shared it with you. Do we make anything of Jay Travis sitting out? Does it matter, or was this all about getting 38 to 40 reps on average for the other 3 guys in the room and allowing Brock Glenn to go live and face some real-life bullets? What do you make of it all, Brendan?
That's exactly what it was, Chris. I'm not going to freak out about Jordan Travis not getting scrimmage reps behind what's basically a half of a first-string offensive line in late March. I think, yes, there's a good, and I'm not sure how active, say Johnny Wilson or maybe some other players were in the scrimmage, some other number ones too, like Trey Benson if he's in green.
I mean, Fabian Lovett's one that Mike Norvell referenced as being on a limited count on Saturday, for example.
Yeah, so. Yeah, it's March. If Jordan Travis were to go sprain an ankle on this Saturday scrimmage, what would people be doing? We know what Jordan Travis is more or less at this point, and there is going to be plenty of time for him to develop continuity and chemistry with some younger wide receivers who may be taking on bigger roles, new tight ends, just developing what he already has with Johnny Wilson. But there's not a huge need to do that right now here in March. So that perspective, I'm totally fine with. I get it. This is something that the coaches talked about, checked with some sources as well this weekend. So, I mean, this is on record from Norvell talking about it. But I think that the FSU really likes the ownership that Jordan Travis took during the sideline, even though he wasn't going live in the game, and did a really good job of mentoring some of the younger guys. And that's important. And this is just a continuation of Jay Trav being the leader that we know he is, we think he is, and he's just continuing to reaffirm that, which is obviously a really good sign.
Yeah, I've seen him do that at practice multiple times. Like a receiver will mess up, some kind of route, whether it's, he's too shallow on a route or whatever, right? And after that play or after that period, Jay Trav will go over to them and kind of talk it over and explain what went wrong and how to fix it. And that's from our point of view. But he does that pretty consistently. I mean, we'll probably see it once a practice or so. And I think that's just what you want out of the leader of your team. And it's awesome to see in action.
Yeah, the continuing evolution of Jordan Travis is apparent. He's become much more vocal, much more comfortable being a leader. It's not an area he was super comfortable with earlier in his career. And even at times, I think last year, but he now is. And I think that's on full display. Mike Norvell called his performance through 5 spring practices prior to the scrimmage elite. We all know how I combat the usage of that word, but it has been. He's been phenomenal. It's been consistently top-notch from beginning to end of every practice. I can't remember a singular stretch where I was like, man, Jordan's just not having a good day. There hasn't been one of those yet. So no concerns there. I will say I was super excited, and I am a bit of the fan club president with Brock Glenn, but I was very excited by what we heard about what he did. I know there was some bad mixed in, which you expect for a freshman in their first scrimmage when they're turned live, but there was also some really, really good. And I think the best thing about Brock Glenn is how he pushes guys ahead of him. It makes it a little more uncomfortable when there is truly a competition going on instead of you're just accepting your role.
That's what Brock Glenn, maybe his biggest value as of right now, the spring is, Chris, is that he's going to make other people around him uncomfortable and will. What's the saying with diamond and pressures? Do we know what that is, or am I going to take us derailing it? Something about
You can just edit it in, just throw it in there, just mix it in. Nobody will know.
Okay, that's great. That's going to take up no time at all for me. Brock Glenn, again, he's a true freshman. He should be what all the cliches are when you talk about an early enrollee. He should be preparing
Getting ready for his high school prom.
Yeah, but it is true. I mean, he is a teenager, and he is throwing the ball against grown men, guys who were 21, 22 years old, going against pass rush with some veterans who've been around the block too. And so there were some good moments. There was some bad. I think they would like for him to have some checks back and just a few more things with controlling the offense a little bit better. Stuff that he can control, right? Is sometimes your arm strength and your arm talent and whatnot. It's just, you can't always control that in a live scrimmage setting. But overall, they liked the way he commanded the huddle. They liked the way he handled himself on the sidelines. Whenever he had a chance to go in the game, he was apparently, or to go into the scrimmage, he was just super excited about it. And, he seems to make the most of every opportunity. He takes it really seriously. And that's the thing we heard about him as a recruit, is he's highly competitive, takes his craft very seriously. And any coach that we spoke to on record, anyone who was at the scrimmage, any intel we've gotten in making calls after, it's all been the consistent theme. It's it could have been areas where it could have been a little bit sharper, but man, they feel like they have something really good with Brock Glenn because of just how mature he is and how he's carrying himself. And then when he flashes a few nice throws, as well as some really impressive athleticism, mind you, he was live. He did not have a green jersey on for this scrimmage. He was allowed to be hit, and he handled himself really well. And that is, he passed the first test, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it.
How many ways did Alex Atkins use to describe how he did? Way, 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 way better than he expected, I think it was. So, yeah.
4.
Again, I don't think Alex Atkins is one to just shovel praise for the heck of it. Like the kid.
They're not gassing. They're not gassing him up to gas him up. Maybe it's a way of letting everyone else in that quarterback room know, Tate and AJ, hey, this kid could come for your stuff if you don't tighten up. But I think ultimately, what Brock's doing is very real. And it's. We all feel the same. I think all three of us have been there. We all feel the same way about the way he carries himself. We'll have to see how he develops. This isn't us anointing him as a future star, but he has the moxie, the mindset, the wherewithal that you want in a quarterback at this level. And ultimately, like I said earlier, that is an encouraging early sign here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as a recruit, Brock was obviously committed to Ohio State. That was kind of a surprising thing at the time, right? Because when you look at Ohio State's quarterback outlook, Brock Glenn really didn't have that much of a shot of getting any playing time with the guy they had in there currently, and then obviously they had at the time the top 2024 quarterback that was committed, Dylan Raiola, who's since decommitted, but when Brock Glenn committed to Ohio State, he was in the class. So a guy that just is, I think, absolutely loves competition and is not scared to compete, even if these guys have been in Mike Norvell's offensive system for multiple years. He's just so good for that room. And I think we've talked about it at length on here, but I think especially with AJ Duffy, push him along a little bit, right? Make him feel a little bit more uncomfortable, because I think that's exactly what he needs to continue his, development within this system.
Yeah, 2 quick things to add on Glenn. One, they did say there's those he would want back and he'll learn from on film. So there are things he did that were miscues. But the other thing is, a year ago, AJ Duffy at times seemed scared or did not have an interest in making throws that may not pay off for him, which is weird to me because he was going to be the number 3 quarterback regardless of the circumstances. With Brock Glenn, there are times where there's a willingness. Yeah, I'm going to take the shot. I believe in my arm. I believe in the ability. There's a window. I'm going to go for it. I just think there's something to that. I like it. And I think it has helped Duffy. I think Duffy's been better this spring. And I think a big reason for that is Brock Glenn. I think it's just helped him along with natural maturity that comes with age and experience. I think it's helped him along. All right, enough on quarterbacks. The next 2 questions kind of, I think, fall in line with one another. The first one is who else stood out on Saturday, but the next one is who's the king of the spring so far? And I feel like the answer is probably the same for both of those with the first name that's going to come out of your mouth.
Okay, I think Chris just tipped his hand of who he thinks it is. So let's talk about Chris, who you think is the king of the spring. 'Cause I know
All day Dre.
okay.
It is all day Dre. He's been good constantly. Mike Norvell can't say enough nice things about him. He's a competitor. I think I said that on the last podcast, and then I believe that was said by Mike Norvell on Saturday. And it's true. It's the greatest quality in the kid. Like, he's athletic, he's talented, he catches ball well, and all of that, but he competes his backside off, and he does it constantly. And that's what's going to make him a guy that's going to be really tough to keep off the field despite a very good wide receiver room. The injury to Micah Pittman has certainly opened up the capability for him to have a role, in my opinion. And he continued that trend on Saturday, making more plays and, again, getting more praise.
Zach, are the kids still saying mossed? Is that a vernacular that's
I feel like
used
that's kind of going out the window, but I guess a little bit.
Well, I'll bring it back for this episode. Apparently, he mossed
It's
DB.
still a segment on ESPN, so I mean, I think it still has some.
But like, when was the last time Randy Moss played? Like, it's gonna be like Madden, where like people don't really know who John Madden was. It's just it's something else. Although Randy Moss not as old as no. Oh boy. All right, moving on. No, but all day Dre apparently went up and got the ball in a pretty spectacular fashion over a DB for a touchdown, and he had a few nice catches on the day, from my understanding. Again, we're not there at the scrimmage, but it sounds like it was another day in which I'll put it this way: there has not been a day where he hasn't done something that's caught my attention. And Zach's shaking his head right now for people listening on the podcast. He's been really good. Is he the king of the spring, though? I mean, the king of the spring to me, the king of the spring to me does have an element of like someone. I mean, it was initially bestowed upon Trayshawn Ward, right? And so it was done kind of as it represents someone who kind of came out of nowhere, right? Kind of surprised us with how good they were, how consistently, and basically leveled up, like the way we're going to view them in the offseason as someone who could potentially help, I think or help more than we had expected going into the spring. So Dre's a really good one for that, Chris. I have a list of about 10 to 12. I'm trying to narrow it down because the fan base our readership wants a power ranking. So I'm trying to get it down to 10. My first name I thought of when I was creating the list, and it's different because we have been really leading this hype train for a while, but I don't know if like it's as consistent, like if every single fan is going to feel the same way about this player as I do. And he had a phenomenal scrimmage. That's Rodney Hill, FSU second-year running back. I was told, coaches talked about him on record, obviously, but I was told that he was excellent. He's
confident
going to be
and comfortable.
Yeah, he's described to me as someone who is going to develop into a dynamic back. You mentioned confident and comfortable. That's how the coaches talked about him on record after the scrimmage on Saturday, Chris. But I think what stands out is like just how far he's come in a year. And last spring, he was quick. He was decisive. There was some juice there, right? Like we all saw it, and it was impressive. And now he's starting to blend it with power, and we're starting to see kind of like with Patrick Payton, that built by storms effect is starting to take in a little bit with him. It sounds like he was just making one big play after another. I think his very first touch went for a touchdown, missing tackles. Someone described him as running violently to me. So just Rodney Hill is someone that I think we collectively as Noles 24/7 members who are at practice consistently, we're buying in on. I am telling everyone else buy stock in him now. He is a front runner, king of the spring for me. Zach, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're forgetting someone here, and that's Kentron Portier. The dude has been absolutely dominant throughout the first third of the spring ball. I just think besides, maybe Johnny Wilson, he's been the most consistent wide receiver. Dre Jacobs has been impressive, but I think we're putting a little bit too much attention on him because he's a freshman. I think that he's done an excellent job, and he's a guy that's absolutely stood out this spring. But Kentron, man, I just think he's playing himself into being a starting receiver. He's stepping up. He's a guy that stepped up in that latter portion of 2022, and a guy that really impressed on Saturdays. And I think early on in spring ball, he looks like he can do pretty much everything as a wideout now. He made that obviously incredible one-handed grab. I think it was the third or fourth spring practice. There's a photo of it on his Instagram that you can see. It's pretty crazy. I didn't realize he got up that high. But man, he's impressive, and he's just a guy that I think has kind of just stepped up when he needed to. And his development's been pretty impressive. I remember him as a high school prospect out of Miami. He was a late addition for Florida State. I think in the 2019 class, 2020, I don't know. But a couple years ago, and back then he was a basketball player, so we knew he was bouncy. But it took him a little bit to develop in FSU's program, but he stuck with it. And Ron Dugans has done an excellent job with him, and I think he's really shown out early on in spring.
And he's someone who, real quick, he's someone that apparently had a really good scrimmage, but a couple big plays were taken back because of penalties. I think one was on him pushing off, so something to clean up. But I think it was a holding penalty as well. So, but someone you still
don't hate on my king of the spring.
Okay, I mean, I'm just saying, keep it real. Let's keep it 100. Are the kids saying that still? A monster.
I think Tron's consistency is extremely impressive because that's always been the thing. Like the highlights have always been there, but it would come and it would go, and it's been much more consistent throughout the spring. Obviously, I'm all about Dre right now. I think the impressive thing about Dre is like I was very high on him as a high school prospect, and I certainly thought he was going to come in here and be successful as a college player. It's just ahead of schedule in my regard. And Rodney Hill is a guy we loved last year. There were times we wanted to see him in games last year. The only problem with that running back room is keeping everybody happy. I mean, there's a great deal of talent in that room. Obviously, Trey Benson at the top, but you got Lawrence Toafili, Keziah Holmes, CJ Campbell is also in that mix, and then Rodney Hill as well. I think it's about finding a role for all of them and kind of figuring it out. The great thing about that room is those guys are not selfish. They very much cheer for one another, care for one another, and they're in it for one another. And that's a very good thing. And that's a credit to Yak. He does a very good job of kind of shaping and modeling that room where it allows them to have that much talent at their disposal without discontent. So that's a good thing. I feel like we did couple. Go ahead, Brendan.
I was gonna say with running back real quick, like it's funny, you see, like you mentioned that personality, that room, that's like a fallout, well, maybe not fallout, but it's a trickle down effect from like Trayshawn Ward and Jayshawn Corbin as well. Like those guys rooted for each other. And like, I think of that room very similar to how I feel like the defensive line room or defensive end room. Like you see guys pass along traits to each other, even the offensive line room. Like they do the fist bump before every play. That's a Dylan Gibbons-esque type of thing they got from him. It's cool to see that, mannerisms or behaviors of players who are no longer here still exist. I think that's a good sign.
Culture is handed down, and I think that is certainly the case. Jayshawn Corbin's as unselfish of a human as they come, and Trey Benson's right there in line with it. And it's pretty impressive when you're talking about two guys one who is playing on Sundays with the New York Giants and another one who will probably play on Sundays for sure, where they kind of lead that room that way, and they're cheering just as much for the next guy up. It's a very good trait. Offensively, I think, tight ends, we haven't talked about them. Kyle Morlock got some praise for a couple of things he did. Jaheim Bell was talked about his versatility. I thought Alex Atkins had a very eye-opening quote about tight ends and what the improvement of that room brings to the fold as far as being able to manipulate in formations and do different things. We saw how wide receiver changed last year and how it changed the offense. I think tight end's next level stuff for FSU. What are they going to do differently this year? Well, I think the tight end is going to play a great deal into that. One negative with that group and negative in general that Mike Norvell mentioned was penalties in the scrimmage. I think the tight end group got called for a couple, probably I would presume clutching at the line of scrimmage type of situations in the run game that brought plays back. Brendan mentioned a couple Tron plays coming off the board because of penalties. There were some others. Alex Atkins referenced, guys doing stuff. He doesn't like pre-snap penalties because that's mental. He doesn't like after the snap penalties because it takes away plays. One's more infuriating than the other, but he doesn't like any of them. They got to clean them up. That's kind of why you have scrimmages, why you have ACC officials at the scrimmage, and why you figure it out. From an offensive standpoint, I think that's about everything. I think we unloaded the cartridge.
I love they had the ACC officials just to prepare for how bad it's going to be during the season.
And they do also have them during some practices. They do a good job of bringing officials in to have that real hanky effect. And the nice thing in that setting, not so much in a scrimmage because the scrimmage is going full octane, but in a practice, when a flag is thrown, there can be a conversation between player and official of what did I do wrong. And the officials will also usually I'll notice this sometimes. So essentially, like, you lined up the wrong way. You need to take a step back. The guy opposite of you was on the line. You were on the line. One of you has to be off. Stuff like that. Like, the conversations are had. And I think it's beneficial I think it's why FSU in general plays a little bit cleaner style in season under the staff than prior ones. Offensively, anything else said?
I'm going down the notes here. No, I think that was everything on the offense. Do a good job streaming through.
All right, so defense will be brought to you by Mission Takeaway just to make Adam Fuller happy. There were a few on the day. Jerry Jones had an interception in the scrimmage, as did Christian White, one of the walk-ons, who's a good contributing walk-on for them, a guy that definitely helps them in the practice setting. And then Bernardo Green, a.k.a. Wolverine, blocked a field goal. I believe
right
it
at
was
the
a
start
short
of
field goal
practice.
situation.
Yeah. Very early on.
Do we want to talk about kicking? I know that's on the tip of your tongue, Brendan. I know not everybody loves it, but
nope.
You don't want to talk about it?
I don't.
Would you color it as a concern through 6?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. It's only 6, so like yes, but yeah. Do I feel comfortable with kicking right now? Not particularly. No.
Is kicking important to you?
Yes, very, especially when you're going to be contending for what FSU thinks is going to be contending for, which is meaningful games.
7
defensively,
3, right? That's what we're going to do.
Yes, yeah, just score touchdowns every time. It's fine. Take kicking out of the equation. You'll be fine. Defensively, we talked about dominant. Two talking points that I want to throw to you guys. One talking point. I'll just drop some scoop real quick. There's going to be a big stretch for Daryl Jackson, I think, coming up in the next. How many more practices? 11 that they got coming up, Chris. Math. He started off so dominantly, and it looked so impressive, and he wasn't bad by any stretch on Saturday scrimmage, but we didn't hear his name a whole lot from who we talked to, and I think there is some concern internally that not concern. That's not the right way to phrase it. It was noticed that he looked more like the Miami version of him, I think, than maybe the what they've seen through the first 5 or so practices. And he had tailed off a little bit even like this past week. I didn't feel his presence as much, like say on Thursday's practices as I had the week before. That's gonna be part of his evolution though, is like getting him to a point where he's a fine, capable starter to where he's unlocking what he can be, which we've seen signs of now, which is a utterly dominant force. So Josh Farmer was great on Saturday. He was really, really, really good on Thursday as well. There's going to be competition there. And so we're going to see how Josh Farmer responds, or excuse me, how Daryl Jackson responds to it coming up here. This is going to be a big stretch for him, I think. Defensively,
Daryl's not the only one, though. One, I enjoyed Adam Fuller sideswiping Daryl Jackson's previous institutions for maybe not coaching him up as necessary. I did enjoy that. I think Daryl Jackson can be described as a light switch guy. When he's on, it's pretty unbelievable, but it also does get turned off at times, and he's going to have to learn to be a more consistent player. Gilbert Edmonds, the other name I was going to throw out there, he's a ceiling guy. I think if you ask the staff, they would probably tell you he might have the highest ceiling of any guy in that entire room if you can fully tap into what he is potentially and as he develops. And the nice thing with him is he wants to develop. He talked about that being part of the reason he transferred here. He's talked about it since he got here, and the staff has echoed that. I mean, with Gilbert, it's just going to be how fast does he come along? How good is he? You know, they got Verse and Peyton ahead of him, so they're comfortable with that. But Gilbert is a guy, especially if DMAC was to leave the program, whose importance will become increased. So it's important that he continues to develop and maybe tap into it and just, become the player he can. But I think spring's very important for Gilbert because not only is he learning the language and how to work with John Papuchis, but it's also about competing against a pretty talented O-line and among a very talented group of peers in the defensive line group. Go ahead, Brendan.
No, I agree. That's well put, Chris. But what I want to ask you guys, you started off talking about the defense, Chris, about mission takeaway. And I would love, this might be fun for you, Chris, because I know you like to do your digging. How many takeaways has FSU's defense created through 6 practices this spring compared to last spring? And not that you have to go and find that right now. If you have it, that's incredible. And that would, he's going to later. I could feel it. All we needed is for Chris to lick his lips, like, and bring out the iPad. And we got him.
Yep, we're done.
But I think that's noteworthy that they have been very active with takeaways this spring. We've just noticed just the eye test. Like they are making plays. The DBs are. Some of it is the ball's finding them, but there is sometimes it just means you're in the right place and you're doing the right thing. When it's happening consistently, it's probably not a coincidence, right? And so is this a matter of just more experience of this group? Is it quarterback play maybe not being as sharp at times? Or is it, people want to know, is this like a Patrick Surtain effect? What's happening? Do we notice all the takeaways happening more often? Am I crazy with that?
I think there's been a good amount of takeaways. I don't know how it compares year over year. The one thing I'll add is I don't think the first team offense is giving it away a whole lot. I think they've been pretty good. I think FSU in general is pretty good about ball security in the sense of not fumbling it, not handing it off to the defense. Interception wise, I think it's been more so reserve quarterbacks and Jordan Travis, who's been extremely good. I can remember maybe one, maybe two times that Jordan's been picked all spring so far. Honestly, I can only remember one off the top of my head.
One in a 7-on-7 that I can remember. So yeah, a couple, but that's fine. Yeah, it's been a lot of flips through 5.
I think it's been a massive point of focus, and it always is. Don't commit penalties, block up front, and take care of the ball, and you win a lot of football games. Those are kind of very basic things, but they're reiterated on a daily basis. But I do think there's a degree of we're going to be very aggressive. We want to be aggressive. And I think, and this kind of loops into the defensive discussion, you bring in Fentrell Cypress, it locks up that number 1 cornerback spot for you, or at least that's the expectation. I think so far they feel comfortable about that. You move Duke Cooper to safety, filling Jamie Robson's shoes. And so far, I think they've been confident in what he's brought to that role. And then they're rolling a lot of guys through corner and nickel over there. Greedy Vance has been praised a good bit for what he's done. He earned that again on Saturday. And then you got, Jerry and Jones, who's played pretty consistent ball and definitely improved upon where he was 12 months ago and 24 months ago in this program. And then you have a lot of other guys, A.Z. Thomas, for example, the new guys like Quindarius Jones, K.J. Kirkland, who's had a very strong spring so far and been very good. I think it's a matter of they're finding guys that fit roles, but they also want guys to be able to play multiple roles. And they want to be able to change the picture on opposing teams, both up front with using a multitude of different defensive linemen in a multitude of ways, and in the back half with using different size, different bodies, different skill sets in different roles. And with some of that, it's like, oh, this looks similar to what I just saw, but it's different people. You try to make the same play, while a different person can make a different play on the ball. Therefore, it creates a turnover. I think ultimately that's the end game goal for FSU's defense this year, is to just create so many different looks. Maybe something that looks the same from an alignment standpoint, very different from the usage of people standpoint, and create opportunities through it. I think that's what they're going to work very hard to be and to do. And there's no doubt in my mind that I think the DB room is probably a little bit more tuned in to a different coach being there than maybe they were with a guy that they had dealt with over a couple of years. And I think that's just a natural order of coaching change. But I think Pat's a guy that demands some respect because of what he's done at the highest level. And yeah, that's probably helped that room to some degree.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I remember last week that play by Greedy Vance where he picked it off, working in the slot. That's probably the best play I've seen him make in his FSU career. And that included obviously some clutch interceptions last season. That was just perfect coverage. I said it before he even made the interception. I was talking to Dane. It's like that. That's just like perfect. Then he goes and picks it off, and it was just an ultra impressive play. And I think that's just a good example of, I think Florida State's defensive backs are playing a little bit more aggressive this spring, and maybe that's why it's leading to more takeaways. That might be anecdotal. I don't know, what it's looking like compared to last year, but it definitely, guys like Greedy Vance, Jerry and Jones, like those guys have been impressive, and it's definitely been noticeable. How much more aggressive they've been this spring.
I thought Brendan had something else. So I gave him the courteous
Thank
pause.
You. I appreciate it. Wait, real quick, Chris, you've looked over to your right twice. What's happening? What's happening up there?
So I have a security camera system in the house, and because the power went off here, I had to reset it this morning. But like light is glimmering off the pool in the bag. It's weird. It looks like rays literally hitting the pool.
Beautiful.
So it just keeps grabbing my attention out of the corner of my eye. I'm sorry.
There's one time. It's fine. There was one time we shot up like this. I thought something bad was happening.
I thought something was falling into the pool, which is a little concerning when you're home by yourself and you have a fence around your backyard. So I was just trying to make sure that everything was good. I didn't know if I was going to have to get up and jet it to the back of the house. Defensively, but the only other thing I can really remembered coming out of Saturday that was discussed, talked about. We talked a good bit about up front in the secondary. So in between linebackers, they're pushing Omar Graham. We've talked about that before. That was reiterated by, I believe, Adam Fuller was talking about it. That Omar is a guy that, because he has now been here for a full year, they want him to be a key depth piece, and they are pushing him very hard to be that. And I think he's responded well. Omar's a smart kid. He's a hardworking kid. And he's a guy who got a great deal of work with the coaches up close and personal. As essentially like a scout team depth guy last year who wasn't going to play, but he leaned into it and he took to it and he worked very hard in it. I think they're seeing some returns on that this year. And again, just to reiterate the point that we talked so much about a year ago, this program, it used to be where we kind of viewed guys as the exact same for a majority of their career. Guys get better. Like, it's amazing. We talked about Pat Payton. Duke Cooper feels like a guy having to bounce back to be a little bit more like what he was 2 years ago versus what he was last year, which was a tough year for him while he was banged up. Greedy Vance is another one. Tron's another one. Both of those guys drastically more consistent than they used to be. There's just a constant improvement going on within the roster, and it's refreshing to see. And I think it's what sets them up to not only be really good up front and, on the top 11 on each side of the ball, but the depth is going to be really, really good on this football team. And I think it's good that guys that we expected to be good have been good, but we're also talking about guys that can help them, if someone got banged up or if they just need to simply have a series or two where they have to go to the reserves. I think you feel a hell of a lot more confident in what you have right now as far as like your 44 deep, even your 55 deep best players on this football team.
Yeah, this has been 2 years of it now, and I think we, like us guys covering it, are now expecting growth, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it wasn't always that way. I think we had to remind ourselves at time, like, guys will get better. They can get better. Jordan Travis being a prime example of that, but like it's across the board. It's all over.
We didn't talk about them, but second-year O-linemen, they've all looked better.
I heard some really good things about Julian Armella with that development. Like, I had someone tell me the other day, it's like he just keeps getting better, and like good. Like that's what it's supposed to be. And now you have this. Listen, that's going to lead to some uncomfortability too, because there's so much competition. But that's like by design. Like, this is what Mike Norvell's wanted. This is what he's visioned as a program. And it's fun, like even listening to like Adam Fuller before the spring talk about like just from a depth perspective of a alignment, like who they have and what they can do with the defense that Chris alluded to earlier. This is what it's supposed to look like. And it's taken them a little while to get here, but I think all the coaches feel very confident with the composition of this roster and what they can do schematically, but more so just culturally, like how it's being handled. With the situation that's happening with Derek McClendon, like I think it's interesting talking to people who are familiar with some players on the team, and like it's not well received, and that's fine. Like and hopefully Derek like makes a decision that he thinks is best for him. I like Derek McClendon, but like the fact that years ago there would be like a player who wouldn't be happy with something and it would trickle throughout others, it would impact other people. Maybe not as widespread like when DJ Matthews tried to leave a player revolt and no one joined him, but there were people who were angsty with him. And that's not the case now. Everyone's very businesslike, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there's not time for players who aren't handling their business. That's being corrected quickly or being moved on from quickly. It's not stagnating. Rot is not like taking over a position group. And, it's early in the spring. We're going to see how this team gets tested in the season. When something bad happens, how do you respond? Typically, it's been pretty good. But yeah, like the development of this program from a physical standpoint, from just an emotional, cultural standpoint, like it's really, really good. And it's been fun to cover. It's probably been the most fun I've had, like out at practice or just covering this program since I've been covering the team in 10 years, maybe since 2013. It's just it's impressive because it's moving in a good direction. It's humming right now.
So that portion was brought to you by Kool-Aid. So now we're going to move on to Buyer Sonnone, brought to you by their Turner Group.
The Turner Group.
Brandon, I'm going to hand the reins to you because you have the Buyer Sonnone questions as a namesake of the segment.
I do, and it's a special Buyer Sonnone. I'll get into that in a second. But shout out to the Turner Group, Colin, Amy Turner, FSU grads. They do an excellent job in Central Florida and throughout the state of Florida and making sure people are really comfortable and confident in the home buying or home selling process. It's not an easy process necessarily, but they make it as easy as possible. And they put a lot of pride into doing it that way. It's not a huge operation, but they work really hard and they make a lot of deals because of it. So you have the efficiency of being able to get a hold of someone like Colin quickly, and he'll help you walk through every step of the way, and you're not just another number with him. But because he works so hard, like it's going to have the level of effectiveness of a big agency. And that's a sweet spot that you really want as a home buyer or seller. You can reach out to Colin at 407-403-8546. Email him at getstarted@theturnergroup.com. Even if you're considering it, even if you're just trying to gauge what the market is, call him, let him know On the Bench sent you, talk about FSU spring practice for a little bit, help us out, but really just get an idea of what he can do for you. If you're, again, in Central Florida, the state of Florida, if you're even considering entering the market, he can help you out. I really recommend it. Let's get into buyer Sonnone here. This is an interesting buyer Sonnone because I didn't open it up on the message board this time for buyer Sonnones. I opened it up to a few message board subscribers who I'm in a group chat with, mainly Ivy, IVB as we like to call them. And the name of the group chat is Daddy's Boys, which is not something that I decided to name them.
Well, there goes the PG rating.
And boys has a Z at the end of it. And I guess I'm daddy in this example. So Zach is unfortunately.
Speaking of things that went out in the 90s.
Zach's in this group as well. Yeah. You guys want to get started on it?
Please.
Yeah.
This one comes from Ivy, buyer Sonnone, Destin Hill. That's it. That's the buyer Sonnone.
Again, really? I'm gonna punch Ivy next time I see him. I revert back to my answer last time. Like, do I think it's realistically a possibility? Yes. Do I think it's a certainty? No. I think there are some things that have to be jumped through to make sure it happens.
Is that a buyer Sonnone?
I don't know. I think it's an or. It feels very much like an or to me.
Chris isn't playing this game today. Zach, what do you say, buyer Sonnone?
Or.
Okay.
No, Sonnone.
Whoa, I'm buying.
No, I'm just Sonnoning on the name Destin Hill. I like Destin Pass on more.
This is also from Ivy, buyer Sonnone. This is Patrick Payton's last year at FSU. So Ivy's drinking the Kool-Aid.
I'll buy that. When he came and spoke about FSU, Georgia Tech, and Ireland, it was him, Marquiston Douglas, and AZ Thomas. I had the moment of thinking in my head, I'm not sure Pat plays in that game. So, yeah, I think it's certainly a possibility. If you're a really good pass rusher, you've already won ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year, you'll be in the discussion potentially for an ACC, all ACC first or second team type of honor this year as a defensive end. You're probably going pro.
That's great for FSU if he's good enough to go pro, because that means you would have 2 pro draftable defensive ends. When was the last time they had 2 guys at the defensive end that were both, I guess, Josh Sweat and Brian Burns together, and DeMarcus Walker? That was a good defensive line.
I mean, J-Rob and Kando both got drafted, but yeah. I'm just saying they did.
In the third round,
factually, that is true. Did the play on the field for FSU say that? No, not so much, but I mean, they did.
Did Kando get drafted? How many sacks did he? Did he not have a sack and he got drafted in the 3rd round in 2020? No need to go back there. Well, that's ambitious, Chris. I guess I hadn't considered that until Ivan's question. Because I think like the progression is like, 5 sacks last year, you get to 7 or 8 this year with a slightly enhanced role, and then 2024, like you are the guy. So I would Sonnone it, but like that would mean he made a huge jump last year. That would mean another huge jump this year in production. So that would be good. Zach,
high level measurables, athletic, the wingspan.
Yeah,
if he is truly a more well-rounded defensive end, kind of a complete package,
yeah, those guys go.
He's
You're right.
He's a well-developed kid. So
Sonnone because of Battle's End.
Yeah, and I thought about that too. I mean, NIL has changed that game where if you're not a sure thing and you can still make pretty good money, come back. So that certainly exists. I don't disagree with Zach in that regard. I go back to the FSU Georgia Tech when he talked, and the first thought that popped in my head is I'm just not 100% sure he plays in that game. Like, I'm not convinced he's here. So
that's a good reminder. The Battle's End, we are running a promo in conjunction with the Battle's End through April 15th, which is a spring game. Basically, at Battle's End, the Battle's End is doing a donor match program. Any donations that occur at the Battle's End, which go to NIL opportunities for FSU football players and other athletes as well. they will have a donor match up to $500,000 of what they raise in this span. And as part of this promotion, we have teamed up with them, and we are offering a free month at Knowles 24/7. Whether you're a current subscriber or someone who's been on the fence about joining, you get a free month. Obviously, you have to sign up with us if you're a new subscriber. And we have details on the Knowles 24/7 website and message board on how to go about and doing that. But whether it's a year you sign up for or a month, you get a month for free. So it's a good deal, and it goes to if you're wanting to find a way to support FSU football players, this is probably the best avenue to do it. Next up, Buyer Sonnone. This is from Matt in Daddy's Boys chat. Natty. Buyer Sonnone, Natty.
Oh,
I did have.
Let's get to an ACC championship first.
I did have someone ask me like who wins the playoff this year, and that's like we're obviously thinking FSU could contend for it, but like Georgia and Alabama breaking in new quarterbacks, USC way out west. I mean, they bring back the Heisman Trophy winner, but they had a lot of holes to fill, and they lose some talent, wide receiver, defensive line. Michigan, maybe. But my point being, we get to it. Clemson. Michigan, Ohio State's going to be breaking a new quarterback. FSU with a veteran. If you're paying attention to like college basketball and transfer rosters and veteran-laden teams, that's a good way to go. And if that has any trickle effect to football, I'm singing a "why not us, why not now" type of vibe for FSU. I'm going to Sonnone it. I can't, in good faith, say I think FSU is going to win a national title, but why the hell would they not be in the conversation? Maybe LSU in there as well. That start of the season game's gonna be a lot of fun. So I'll Sonnone it, but they are in the conversation.
Sonnone, but I agree with Brendan. I think they're going to be in contention for it. But I'm with Chris. Let's get an ACC championship dub first.
Could they somehow get into the playoff without winning the ACC? Probably not this year. It's not expanding.
I mean, okay, so let's say they beat LSU,
right?
They lose to Clemson
in the regular season. What if you win the regular season but lose to Clemson?
If you split with Clemson?
Yeah.
I mean, depends on how good Clemson is.
Yeah, if Clemson loses.
If Clemson's a playoff contender and you split with them and you beat LSU, good old strength of the schedule is we have to go to the computers. But yeah, I think there's a realistic scenario where it's a possibility.
All right, let's go back to Ivy. Buyer Sonnone, all-day Dre plays 100-plus snaps this season as a freshman. I think that's only on offense. We're not going to count special teams.
Go ahead, Zach.
100 snaps, that's a lot, right?
That would make him...
Over 12 games, it would be an average of 8.5 per game, roughly.
How many did Josh Burrell play last year that prevented us steak?
Like 40 or something?
Yeah. I mean, you can get 40 in one game of garbage time, depending on how early that happens. And he's somewhat, you know what? I'm going to buy it because I think there'll be enough garbage time snaps, and I think he will, in some games, be integrated into like the game plan to where he'll have like enough like on both ends. He'll be burnt on both ends there. Like, we'll be getting 30 or so real like first team snaps, and then he'll be able to do like multiple games of garbage time there to give him a lot of at bats, I think. So I'm going to buy it. I think that's realistic.
How many total snaps did FSU have last year in 13 games? Was it over 1,000, right? Or
yeah, I'm pulling that up.
To 1,000?
I'm pulling it up. That sounds about right, Chris. It will be interesting to see, side note, whether they amp up the tempo a little bit more just because of all the weapons they have, whether they think that might benefit them with depth and just playmaking ability, like whether you want to get more reps.
So if it was 1,000 and it's 500 offensive snaps, that's 20% of offensive snaps. Do I think you can play in 20% of offensive snaps? I don't know. I think it's probably hovering around that number. I guess I would I don't know. He's been really good in the spring, obviously. But
Kool-Aid,
it's going to come down to, is Micah Pittman available? Because if he is, that changes the dynamics of the numbers. Winston Wright, Kai Douglas is another guy that kind of factors into that discussion of that role. Yeah.
So basically, you're saying your king of the spring is going to do nothing this year?
No, I think he'll do plenty, but I think it might be picking his punches versus playing a healthy amount of snaps.
Doesn't sound like a king.
Chris dropped.
Okay,
Dropped
I'm buying it because Zach's punching me in the belly. He's jabbing me right here.
I just wanted to
so
force you to buy it.
No.
There you go. I bought
it. This is routes run, so it's not the same. Like, it's just standing there and perimeter blocking. But like the most routes run by a wide receiver last year, just for context, 266 from Johnny Wilson. Someone like Kentron Porter, who felt like meaningful snaps last year. He only ran 87 routes. Ja'Kai Douglas was hurt, 79. I mentioned earlier someone who was in the game for about like 50 snaps, but only ran 5 routes, Josh Burrell. So just for context, 100 snaps might be more ambitious than I initially thought. But you know what? I said bye. I'm not going to go back and forth, flip-flop like Chris did. No.
I wanted to Sonnone, but Zach punched me one too many times, so I had to buy.
Come on, Zach, you bully. This is from Will. Buy or Sonnone. Trey Benson will have more rushing yards than the rest of the running back room combined this season. It's good. I think it's going to make you think a little bit. It's going to make you ponder.
I think also known that, even though I am a firm believer that Trey Benson will be featured 1A back and may be more featured than recent years where they split carries a bit more. I still think from a yardage standpoint, the collective of that room will slightly eclipse what he does.
Yeah, I'll buy that too. I agree. I think they just they want to keep their backs, not as battled throughout a game, and I think we'll see. Keziah Holmes will even get reps, and then obviously Lawrence Toafili, Rodney Hill, and maybe even CJ Campbell at some point. So, no, I think the rest of those guys will probably amount to more.
Yeah, I guess I will Sonnone it. I think they have 3 to 4. By the way, I heard CJ Campbell had a really good scrimmage as well. Keziah Holmes did. I think he left a little gimpy, but should be fine. So yeah, they have 5 guys who are legitimately all ACC, not all ACC caliber, ACC caliber running backs, and then you factor in like Jordan Travis running the ball. I don't know if we will count Shaheem Bell at any point as like a running back, if that is a role that he ends up having, but I think he has that skill set to help out too. So yeah, I don't know if you're going to have to turn to Trey Benson a ton this year, but you do want him to be like in a good rhythm too, right? Like that is a thing that he's very much a rhythm-based runner, and we saw that last year. Like when he just gets thrown into the fire, not as effective as when he's playing and heating up for multiple games in a row, and speed of the game is kind of settling in for him. So that's worthwhile too. I guess we'll see how they manage him. It'll be interesting. Buy or Sonnone. This is from Ivy. Blowstein is the next Wilt Fong. Well, first off, I think Wilt Fong is still the next Wilt Fong. Like he's not slowing down currently. Zach, if you want to be the next Wilt Fong, you can be. You can do anything you want to do. I'm gonna pull a little parenting cliche. You can do anything you put your mind to, Zach. Buy.
I'll buy it. I think Zach's great at his job. He's got a better head of hair than Steve too. He's got that going for him.
Low bar.
But Zach is incredibly impressive for his age at building sources, building relationships, working sources, getting information, embedding information. And those are all qualities that Steve is magnificent at. Steve is as hardworking of a dude as I've ever met in this business. He is the best at what he does in this business. And that's not me blowing smoke up his ass because he works for a company I work for.
Good show.
The dude is phenomenal at it. I think Zach has every bit of the making to do it. And Zach's probably beat him a little bit out of the tunnel as far as age group for getting after it and doing this job. I think Steve was a little bit older before he honed in on doing what he does now.
Thank you, boys. Learn from the best, obviously. But I'm Sonnoning it. I like where I'm at right now. And Steve's doing his thing, and he's the GOAT at this. But yeah, I'm not going to toot my own horn. I think I'm creating my own path.
Oh, cool.
The amazing thing, to add on Steve, the amazing thing, he's going to break news. He's going to break crystal balls, and he's going to hit at an insanely high rate. But like he has the trust of the kids and their people to do that. And he balances that, which is insanely difficult to balance, especially this day and age with NIL and the ability for the rug to be pulled out from underneath your feet more than ever in recruiting before. And that's just an unbelievable quality, how good he is at doing that. And I love working with Steve. I didn't really know Steve when I came over 24/7. I did talk to him right before I made the switch and came over to the company. But I was impressed by him then, and now working with him for almost 11 years. Yeah, I think the world of the dude. I think he's phenomenal at what he does.
And he does it from like the Midwest, where like it's not a potent recruiting area. So he's doing most of his stuff, most of his source building connections all over the phone, which is just super impressive.
And he's all about business. The man just works. So,
do you guys want to say anything nice about me?
I love you, Brendan.
You're all right, I guess.
Ivy, Bayer, Sonnone. Duffy takes non-garbage time snaps this season. I will Sonnone. I think he's trying to. I think what Ivan's trying to do here is to get us to say he's going to be the QB2 if like Jordan Travis misses any time. But I think I will Sonnone that right now. I think this is still Tate's job as the incumbent backup to Jordan Travis.
Yeah, seconded. I agree.
Sonnone.
Will Bayer, Sonnone, over 2 FSU offensive linemen on all ACC teams. There were 3 last year.
Oh, bye.
I mean,
4.
Jeremiah Byers, yes. Are we talking all ACC teams or all ACC first team?
You know what? Let's cut out honorable mention, and because there's at least
1, 2,
4 that
3s.
were, yeah.
They're 100% going to have more than 2. Bye.
I mean, I feel like if Robert Scott gets healthy, yes. Jeremiah Byers is a definite yes for me. I ain't betting against Mo Smith. The dude just never gets knocked down in a 12-round fight.
And then one of the guards is definitely.
So that's more than 2. Yeah. So I'll buy.
ACC, well, I was saying ACC media, all media, we're pretty lazy. And when we look at offensive line play, we're just going to look at what offense had the most yards, especially who had the most rushing yards, who carved out the most space. With that in mind, I did put this out on Twitter earlier. FSU over the last 2 seasons. Oh, did something fall down into the pool, Chris?
Nah, just another ray of sunshine. It's a beautiful day out, apparently.
Your little ray of sunshine. Over the last 2 years, FSU has the top 3 rushers in the ACC in yards per carry. Trayshawn Ward over that 2-year span, and then Trey Benson and last year, Jashawn Corbin the year before. So if history shows us anything, FSU is probably going to be very efficient running the football again this season, and the offensive line will probably be rewarded for all ACC honors. So yeah, I'm going to buy it with an over, probably an easy over. Ivy asks, Bayer, Sonnone, Duke Cooper starts over Akeem Dent at safety.
So Shaheem Brown would be at the other spot. Is that how we're gonna?
That's how I interpret
crafting
it.
that.
I think so because Shaheem Brown's skill set's more unique or more different. Is different than what the other two. The other two have more similar skill sets as corners who played safety.
For me, for now, I'm Sonnoning it. I think Akeem Dent and Duke Cooper are your most likely 2 safety starters, with Shaheem Brown being the changeup.
I think it'll be Akeem and Shaheem. It kind of rhymes with you can move Shaheem in sub packages down to the line of scrimmage, or it's like kind of like the Jamie Robinson role. He's got more Jamie Robinson type of vibes to him, as like this guy who can do a little bit of everything. Then you have Duke Cooper being your third safety, who's going to play like a good amount of snaps. I mean, you're going to probably use that sub package a lot, as we saw this past year. So that would be me. So I would Sonnone it. I don't think Duke, as good as he's been this spring, starts over Akeem Dent, but the idea of a starter may not mean a ton, because I think the reps will be distributed fairly evenly among those 3. I think you feel good about all 3 of them. That's the bigger takeaway is Duke could even be in this conversation. Zach?
I'm Sonnoning. I think it's Akeem Dent and Shaheem's job to lose, and I think Duke will be, like you said, the third guy in the rotation.
All right. I got 2 more. This one's from Ivy as well. This is off of some scoop that Chris dropped at Knowles247.com earlier today. Bayer, Sonnone, Jonathan Daniels commits to FSU this weekend.
I'll Sonnone it. I don't think FSU is really pushing for commitments right now.
I don't either. I thought maybe they would for the like during the junior day last week or the legacy weekend, but that didn't happen. And so like now the next 2 dates are spring game and then late June, which is typically when they've pushed for commitments in the past.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Daniels has mentioned that he wants to make a summer decision. I believe it was him that said that. I know Jason Sandomelo is another offensive lineman that definitely is making a decision in July is what his plan is. But I think Jonathan Daniels is in the same category, and FSU expects to host him for one of his official visits, which will likely take place in June. And I expect he probably makes a decision after those officials. So Sonnone.
Are we sweating Xander Miller, by the way, getting the Georgia offer? We thought FSU was
That was interesting, right? That Georgia got into the mix.
I mean, that kind of is like what happened with Aluba a couple years ago, where you get someone who's rising and moving up, and you're in the driver's seat, and then Georgia enters the picture. We'll see, I guess, what comes of that.
Yeah, he never dismissed back-to-back national champions, but FSU's done a phenomenal job with Xander Miller. Lucas Simmons and him are very close. Yeah, I'd be surprised if Xander Miller ends up somewhere other than FSU.
Last question. This is directed towards me from Ivy. B-Sun, that's me in the group chat, I hate this group chat so much, by the way. B-Sun eats at Chili's with us in Orlando over Labor Day weekend. As tempting as that sounds, I mean, maybe, but also known. I don't think I'm going to get out to Chili's in Orlando, although it is a very Orlando type of destination. No one does Chili's like Orlando. I'm just going to put it that way, guys.
Didn't the Chili's in Tallahassee close down? The one on Appalachia?
Probably. I mean, if you're a restaurant, here's the thing about Appalachia. I don't know how, we don't have any sponsors there. No, I don't know how many restaurants die on Appalachia and then a new restaurant comes in their place doing the exact same thing they did. And then Ale House is the only one that's lived. Ale House
is
like
so hard to it's like no one wants to go on the side road to go to those restaurants.
Oh, the side road. What do we do in Appalachia? Like the service road? Get out of here. What are we doing? It's 2023. Who's doing service roads anymore? I never had to deal with that until I moved to Tallahassee. It's crazy. It does not make any sense.
All right. Buyer Sonnone was brought to you by the Turner Group. So now we're going to move on to some recruiting.
All right, guys. I'm going to let you finish it up. I got to go get my hair cut. It looks crazy right now. So bye. I'll post this later.
Sonnone. All right.
All right, Zach. Talk. So let's do the overview, the 50,000 feet view of the weekend. Is it fair to say that this weekend did not feel like the club was real exclusive?
Yeah, I mean, it had vibes of 2022, if that's what you want to say. But that's not, anything to look down upon just because of the amount of talent they've already had or FSU's hosted on campus so far this spring. Obviously, there's going to be some weekends that aren't as talented as others. There still were some key prospects that we can talk about from this weekend.
Yeah, I think it was ballpark 50 to 75 total kids in through the building. I would say there was roughly a dozen that were guys that moved the needle, guys that we care about. And there was a good amount of 25 and 26 kids. So they are, for the first time in a long time, FSU is truly recruiting in advance. They're ahead of the schedule. That hasn't happened around these parts under the last two regimes, and certainly not the end of the prior one. So that's a good thing. That is a positive from the weekend. All right, diving in, though, we're going to mostly focus on, I believe, 24 guys that were in this weekend. I'll start it off with a commitment. Jamori Flagg, defensive tackle, South Florida kid. You mentioned earlier him and Pat Payton have some relation. What did you learn after Jamori took a 2-day visit to Tallahassee?
Yeah, he just spent a ton of time around the staff, got in on Friday, flew in from South Florida out of Miami Booker T. Washington High School, and he's spent a ton of time around the staff. Like I said, Randy Shannon, his area recruiter, and then other guys like Odell Higgins, defensive tackles coach, and then director of high school relations, Ryan Bartow, and also spent a good amount of time with head coach Mike Norvell. Had everything great to say about the trip. When asked about his commitment status to Florida State, said it was super solid. There was really nothing to worry about. He did say, however, that he does plan to take some other visits to other programs over the next couple months. I think Penn State was the only school that he really mentioned by name as a program that he's looking to set up a visit with. He did visit Miami recently. I think it was in January. That's the only other school I know he's visited as of late, but he did get some other offers to start 2023. I think UF offered and a couple other schools. So a guy that's definitely receiving interest from other programs. I think the most positive development from Flagg's visit was his updated measurements. I was told that he measured in at 6'3" and close to 300 pounds. I think it came in, just a shade under 298. But there was some question before, about where he'd be listed at the next level, whether it be an edge or an interior defensive lineman, because his previous weight before I, switched it up on 24/7 was at 235 pounds, which I believe was recorded before his junior season. but he's obviously going to be an interior defensive lineman now, pushing the scale at almost 300 pounds. And I think, that's a positive development. FSU told him over the weekend that he's going to likely be a nose tackle for them within their defensive scheme, which I thought was interesting. I thought more of a three tech would be, the role for him, but that was what Flagg told me after his visit is what was Florida State's plan for him at the next level. So thought that was interesting, but yeah, pretty much a solid interview. The whole video interview with Flags up on Noles 24/7. I posted that this morning. He's a great kid, and I think FSU got a good one with him. We'll see. If he takes any other visits. I think Penn State, like I said, was the only other school he mentioned, but you never know. He could go and make some trips to other schools, but for right now, I think he's pretty locked in with Florida State.
Yeah, Zach did a very good intel piece on the entire weekend, highlighting around a dozen or so of the main topics, main prospects that made their way through. So definitely check that out. Good bit of information. Zach, I'll front this next one with who that visited this weekend would you most willingly bet ends up in FSU's class?
Man, I guess
I have one off the top of my head.
Yeah, 3-star tight end Hubert Calise out of
same
Louisiana. One. Yeah, he continues to say Florida State leads for him, and I think FSU's pretty high on him. Being recruited by area recruiter David Johnson, tight ends coach Chris Thompson, and even some by head coach Mike Norvell. This visit was more of a laid-back trip for him, besides obviously watching the scrimmage like all these guys did. But he said he might get back to FSU for the spring game on April 15th. And he said he wants to make a commitment before his senior season, so likely sometime over the summer. I said in my intel piece that you mentioned, as long as FSU continues to push for Caliste, I expect him to end up in the class. So probably an easy pick there out of the guys that were on campus this weekend.
Yeah, he's a guy that Yak knew about before most. I think, in fact, his son may have played with him over there at St. Aug. Yeah. St. Aug had a bunch of kids in this weekend. That's a school that Yak has a phenomenal relationship with. He used to work there. So that helps, obviously, with kind of building a bridge. Basketball, football kid, a good development going on there. I think his stock will continue to rise during the evaluation period. His offer list has improved dramatically since FSU started recruiting him versus where it is now. I think that trend will continue. He's a kid I like, especially if you're going to take a couple tight ends in the class. I think he can be a very good second one for you. All right. Staying on the offensive side of the ball, a couple of O-linemen that were there. John Wayne Oliver. I don't know why, but the name always triggers me to some degree. And then Marcus Easley. Talk a bit about those two guys.
Yeah, so John Wayne Oliver, we didn't actually catch up with him. I know Dane was working on that, but he snuck out the more. So I don't know, what that was about, but it's all good. He enjoyed his trip. He posted on Twitter and he told Dane Draper that he now intends to take an official visit to FSU in June. He said to Dane that that FSU staff is working on a date for that trip and that they want it to be his last official visit. So I guess that's a little newsworthy, right? Means that they probably like him a good amount. We'll see if he does end up setting up that official. Then Marquez Easley, an intriguing prospect, listed at 6'7", 300 pounds out of Illinois, top 247, I guess, prospect in our rankings, and a guy that has received a ton of interest from a bunch of schools. He's got officials already set up to Georgia and Tennessee. He stayed at FSU pretty much all day on Saturday. He arrived a little bit before the scrimmage. So that was, around 10 in the morning. And then he stayed all the way until about 7:30 p.m. He was the last guy to leave the building. So spent a ton of time around the staff. He didn't fly out until Sunday morning. And Alex Atkins was obviously the point man for Easley, but he spent, a good amount of time around Atkins' offensive lineman assistants, Cooper Williams and Gabe Fertitta. He claimed the Noles have a good shot at making his upcoming top list and that he intends to return to campus, but he doesn't yet have a date locked in for that trip. We'll see, how heavily FSU continues to recruit him. Obviously, he's a guy that's, out of state. They have a few targets in state and around, in the surrounding area. I think FSU as a whole is just not super high on the 2024 offensive line class, but he's a guy that obviously flew in. So, somewhat of a name of note, and we'll see kind of where things go between the two sides moving forward.
Yeah, he came with mom and little brother on a visit. Flipping to the defensive side of the ball, Elias Rudolph's a kid now at Deerfield Beach in South Florida, formerly at Taft up there in Cincinnati, Ohio area. He moved down here. He's looking forward to playing the competition in Florida and what comes with being in Florida as far as being close to so many high-level schools, including Florida State. Rudolph is a kid that was supposed to come in, I believe, Legacy weekend originally was the expectation. That didn't happen. Instead, he comes this past weekend. First time up here, first time spending time on campus. FSU offered roughly a month ago in late February. What did Rudolph take away from his time around FSU? And he is one of the guys earlier we referenced, guys talking about the defensive line and the performance of defensive ends. That did stand out to Rudolph. That's one thing I recall from his exit interview.
Yeah, he did say that when asked about the scrimmage. And then, I kind of asked him, he's obviously a guy that moved recently from Ohio to South Florida, my neck of the woods. And I basically asked him, how did things spark up between you and FSU? Obviously, the offer came in late February, but he basically said his move is what sparked that. FSU's coaching staff got word of where he was going. He's an in-state kid now. They probably have a better shot, especially if his family's down there. And that's where the contact sparked up between him and FSU. The main contact for him is FSU defensive ends coach John Papuchis. He said afterwards that Florida State has a good shot at making his upcoming top 9, but they will have to battle out with some of the top Midwest programs that were already involved in his recruitment before his move to Florida, and Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and some others. And then he also did visit a now local program for him, Miami. I believe that was earlier on in March. So, yeah, a guy that's visited a ton of schools. Honestly, if you check his kind of Twitter and Instagram, he's been everywhere over the last couple of months. But a guy that I think FSU now has a decent shot with, that he's in state, and Deerfield Beach is a program that FSU's coaching staff is pretty familiar with. They've, Ron Dugans has recruited that school for a long time. So, I think he'll be influential in that one. And then obviously John Papuchis as the lead man, defensive ends coach, recruiting Elias Rudolph, who is listed at 6'4", 220 as an edge prospect, a top 247 kid as well.
Another South Florida defender that spent actually multiple days on campus was Ryan Mack. I believe Ryan's a Miami legacy. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Zach.
Yeah.
What did you take away from the South Florida DB as he left campus after wrapping up a multi-day visit?
Yeah, so his dad, Rod Mack, played linebacker for Miami in the 1990s. He was actually at Miami earlier last week, but then, like you said, trip to FSU for both Friday and Saturday. I think he's kind of an underrated guy. I think Florida State really likes Ryan Mack, and I think that has to do mainly with Pat Surtain, who I think is familiar with Mack and his family, and that's the coach that he said that he spent the most time with. He said he's being recruited as a cornerback for FSU, and that'll be interesting. I think he really enjoyed his trip. I'll probably do a full blown out story on him sometime this week just about the visit. But he said he's likely taking his official visits during the summer, and that the only other planned visit he has right now is Pittsburgh, and he intends to get back to Florida State at some point, but he didn't have a date locked in for that.
Is he related to King, who went to Penn State?
I don't think so. I actually asked about that. Okay. So King Mack is a 2023 prospect from St. Thomas Aquinas as well. It's just weird, right? They have the same last name from the same high school.
Yeah, I didn't know if they were brothers, maybe cousins. I wasn't sure.
I know it's not listed on his profile, and I think I asked someone about that recently, and they said they weren't related, which I found surprising too.
Rule number 1 of recruiting South Florida, always take an Aquinas kid. That's in the rule book for me, at least. All right, so the last name I'm going to bring up kind of transitions us into the next topic as well. It's a linebacker, Monte Whedon, kid from Washington. So 1, about his visit, but 2, your thoughts on linebacker recruiting. I know it's kind of a lightning rod topic, so let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah, so Monte Whedon flew in from Washington, D.C. He goes to St. John's High School up there. He's listed 6'1", 215 on his profile. Other top offers for him include Texas, Ole Miss, Boston College, Maryland, and a few others. Texas is the most recent one, and that's a school that he did mention when I asked about, or when Dane asked about what other schools are involved with him. So he made a 2-day trip to Florida State this weekend, arriving on Friday before departing on Saturday. He said he spoke to a lot of coaches, but said it spent most of his time on the trip with Randy Shannon, FSU's linebacker coach. He liked the conversations with Shannon, as well as what he saw during the scrimmage from a coaching standpoint from Shannon. Whedon says he intends to now officially visit FSU in the summer. That'll likely occur in June, obviously, because that's when most of the officials will take place. And he said FSU is probably his top school after this visit. He intends to make a commitment before his upcoming football season, so likely again during the summer. And you know, about the second part of that question, FSU's linebacker.
Real quick, who does Whedon remind you of physically?
A little like Tatum Bethune.
I agree, which I feel like has become the standard type of what Randy Shannon appears to be going for.
Yeah,
that may be me perceiving that topic more than somebody telling me that. But I like Whedon's film. For the record, like, I know people will lose their mind because he's not ranked in his offer list isn't out of this world. I do like that kid's film.
I haven't watched yet. Right. What does he do well?
He's more quick than fast, but he's very physical. He does a good job of plugging space. He's just aggressive. He gets to the ball. He tends to be around the ball, and he makes good plays on the ball, and he finishes plays really, really well. I like the way he moves. I mean, so let's jump into the linebacker discussion.
Yeah.
I know Randy Shannon comes with a certain context as a linebacker coach and recruiter. Like, that's a natural through the door that was talked about. Randy Specials, for example, is one of those topics that was thrown around the minute he was officially hired as an on-field coach for Florida State. Obviously brought in Tatum Bethune via the portal. This past class, FSU adds a guy like Blake Nicholson, who Randy assisted on, but it was also a major win for Derek Ray, who had ties to the area that Blake was from. They also had DeMarco Ward, and Dylan Brown Turner was late at the whistle ad, where I think they wanted to add another high school kid for further depth in the room. There wasn't really a portal kid available. That made sense with the fact that you have two very solid starters in Kalen DeLoach and Tatum Bethune returning for you this season. So fast forward, we're now in this cycle. Monte Whedon's the name we're talking about. I think there's a couple topics worth mentioning. One, the amount of names we're talking about at the position. I think that's something that causes hesitation from people. The type of players they're recruiting, especially from a ranking standpoint here early in the early stages of ranking. And just in general, when it feels like all of FSU's recruiting is on an uptick, that they're recruiting at a different level at a majority of positions, I think there's people, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but there are people that think linebacker is kind of getting left behind. So, Zach, take that baton and run with it and share your thoughts on it as somebody that's super in-depth on the recruiting side of it all.
Yeah, well, I think there was a good topic brought up on the Noles 24/7 message board. I forgot who posted it, but they basically broke down how many offers have been sent out at the linebacker position in the class of 2024 by Florida State compared to some of the other, top schools, Georgia, Alabama, Miami, whatever, right? Schools that Florida State's, somewhat competing with. And Florida State had the most. I think it was 22, and then the next most was like 16. But there's a difference between casting a wide net of offers and then those offers becoming legitimate targets for you, right? And I think that's where the issue lies in this case. If you look at pretty much every other recruiting board, aside from maybe quarterback, because you already got one committed, it's extensive. You've got multiple options. You got plan A types and then plan B types, and then even some plan C's that, if worse comes to worse, you're going to take that guy, or maybe just go to the portal, right? I think a great example is defensive back. I mean, that's the best example. There's about 15 guys on that board that might or might not be takes. They're all, talented prospects that have visited Florida State within the past few months. I think that's an important thing to note, right? Visits matter. If you're going to be a legitimate candidate for a prospect, you need to get them on campus. And I can't say that really for the linebacker position, aside from a few guys. The one that comes to mind as a top target is Peyton Pierce, who was here out of the state of Texas for Legacy Weekend. That was his first ever trip to Florida State. I don't know if I'm comfortable running whatever, being in recruiting and my top target at a position of probably need after this season is a guy from the state of Texas that's only visited Florida State one time. Behind him, there's a guy like Edwin Spillman out of Tennessee who visited here in January, but does not currently have a plan to get back here this spring. I asked him recently, and he had Georgia, Miami, and some other trips set up. I think UAB, but no plans to get back to Florida State. That's not saying that can't happen, but right now doesn't have a plan to get back. Hasn't been here yet in March, and that's an important part. As far as that's a guy that a lot of people think is probably going to end up at Tennessee, being from that state. He's already got crystal balls for the Volunteers. So, but behind those guys, I think that's where this issue comes. You got Monte Whedon, like we just talked about. Jeremiah Marcelin's a 3-star linebacker that visited in January, part of a bigger group that came up, and he is a guy that I checked on. And I don't believe at the time, a few weeks ago when I checked, he was a take for Florida State. So it just comes to my mind that the board needs to be expanded with legit targets. It's not the same as other position groups where you're seeing these high caliber prospects at the top, and then some guys that you'd be okay with taking, some maybe lower end blue chip guys, and then some 3-stars that maybe you feel, or the staff feels they maybe have evaluated better than what the ranking suggests, right? But that's not the case for linebacker. The board isn't built that linebacker. The board is not built that way. That's just my personal take on it. I think that the overall recruiting of that position, between recruiting the top targets and then also building out a board, needs to be improved upon. Chris, what is your opinion?
I think it's a funny topic in the sense where it does create like a lot of emotional response from a lot of people in a variety of ways. Yeah. I think the truth of it is that Randy Shannon recruits differently than most, especially in this day and age. Good or bad, I don't know. The results usually will prove that out. I do think it would benefit FSU to expand that board from an offer standpoint, especially with guys more so in the region that you can get on campus more regularly that you like. For example, Quay Birdsong is a guy that I wish they had gotten on campus. They did try to in January. They were supposed to earlier in March. Neither of those happened. He's now focused on 5. FSU is not one of them. Not saying he's a guy that I definitely want FSU to get, but he's a guy that I would have liked to see on the board, worth evaluating further, being in a discussion with more so than they were. That's an example. At the end of the day, they're going to have to get probably 3 or so linebackers in this class because you're almost certainly losing your top 2 in Deloach and Bethune, obviously. And then it's a whole lot of to be determined at the position. Now, some of that probably going to end up portal hunting for a kid or two, just because you're going to have to add some age experience in that room because your next guy's up, maybe Steven Dix, but I'm not a believer that he's a guy that's going to be a primary starter for you at any point. Omar Graham, who's in his second year here, is a guy who I think can help them. DJ Lundy's another guy who is in that mix, who has had some starter experience, but you're going to have to mix that room up a little bit more. There's not the clear-cut next man up, necessarily speaking. So it's going to be interesting. I don't love the recruiting of that position. I think a whole lot of energy is expended on discussion of the recruiting of the position, when in reality, behind like tight end and quarterback, it's the lowest number recruited position in the sense of the number you need to get in a particular class. If you hit on one, for example, I think they hit on Blake Nicholson last go round. That's a really good one. That's a solution to your future problems. You got to hit on one. And I think the concern right now is that, like, I like Monte Whedon, but I don't know if Monte Whedon is that dude that says you hit on a solution to the problem necessarily if you were to end up landing him in the end. So would I like to see more names? Would I like to see more regional guys? Would I like to see maybe a dude that I could point to and be like, yeah, I think he's the number 1 on the board and they can realistically get him? Yeah, certainly. But I also, I don't get overly stuck on the thought of linebacker recruiting in March.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not knocking Randy Shannon as a coach. I think he's an excellent coach and a guy that can probably develop linebackers better than most. But we're at Florida State, and if you remember those teams that were winning natties and competing every year, they had killers at linebacker. Are we going to be able to say that after Deloach and Bethune leave? Or do they have killers in that room that can go and maul offenses? Like, it doesn't feel like the position's being recruited at the level it should be in accordance with like the ascension of Florida State's program right now. You just came off a 10-win season. You got everything going for you in the offseason, pretty much. You've got, the staff that's had continuity for a while. You pretty much have everything going for you in recruiting. And we've seen that ascension at different positions, right? Quarterback, you've got your guy. Running back, you've got your guy, and you've got other top targets. Receiver, the board is plentiful with top talent. Like, it just doesn't feel like it's on par with the rest of the recruiting that's going on at different position groups. And I feel like that's where the issue lies for me. Maybe it'll improve. Maybe they'll get a string of visits. But I remember talking even last year compared to what was not a great, field of recruiting for Florida State last cycle. Linebackers still felt lackluster until, the Blake Nicholson situation unfolded. And give Randy Shannon credit for that. Obviously, you talked about Derek Ray's influence in that recruitment because of his ties to that area. But Randy was involved in recruiting Blake Nicholson. And if Randy wasn't involved, who knows what would have happened, right? And I think Randy's pedigree speaks for itself. He has coached some of the best linebackers that have ever played college football. So I'm not trying to, knock on him as a coach, but I just think overall, the position needs to be recruited better, and it needs to be recruited in a way that's going to be on par with some of the recruiting that's going on at other positions for Florida State right now.
It's a good summary saying you would like to see an uptick in the recruitment of it, similar to what we've seen at tight end in this cycle.
Yeah. Have we seen, there hasn't been a tight end board as extensive as this one that Florida State has right now. I mean, and yeah, I think it's a perfect way of putting it. Chris Thompson has built out a board that is impressive top to bottom. A guy like Hubert Calise is probably, a tight end 2 in your class, and you're going to go big game hunting for a tight end 1, and with guys like Kylan Fox, Landon Thomas, and Walter Matthews. Like, that is how I want my board set up at linebacker. I think that's the best way to do it. And like you said, maybe, like, I'm the leader of the fan club of, I think, linebackers out of the portal. Like, if you can find a good one, I think that's probably the best solution, because I think that's one of the positions out of high school that you have to physically develop the most. There's not a lot of high school linebackers that are physically developed to go and start and contribute for you very early on in their college careers. And I think we've seen that at Florida State. You need guys that can physically develop in a college strength and conditioning program. And if you can, accelerate that process by getting someone out of the portal, go for it. And I think FSU absolutely plans to do that. But that's not to say that you can slack on high school recruiting. And I think that's some of what's going on right now at that position.
Yeah, last comment on linebacker from me, and then we'll move on to the last topic of the discussion today. I think that linebacker is a position maybe more than any on defense where you need a guy that fits what you do on defense with that position. It's not like one size fit all. Defensive ends, if they're long, they're lanky, they're athletic, and they can rush the passer, then yeah, they're probably going to fit pretty much any team in the country. Linebackers, not necessarily that. Obviously, there's certain assets you want in every linebacker, but different teams do different things with them. And I think FSU and the competition they play in the ACC, a lot of spread heavy, a lot of pass heavy to the middle of the field. You need a certain type of guy who has certain level of athleticism, awareness, and can play to all angles and all directions of the field. So I do think the portal is intriguing in that sense, because you have more of this is a guy in the college atmosphere playing a team similar to what we play, or maybe a team we do play, doing what we want to see, and then you go and get them. All right, last topic, pretty short one, because right now the list is kind of thin for the week, which is honestly a little nice. Need a little bit of a breather after a very busy March so far. Visitors this week. How about it, Zach?
Yeah. I, for some reason, don't have the list up right now. Sorry. Give me 1 minute.
Well, to set the picture of the week, Tuesday, Thursday, practices for FSU. Saturday, scrimmage, same as last week. Friday will be pro day. I don't know if they intend to bring anybody in for pro day in the sense of having a kid watch it. Other than Jamie Robinson, there's not a whole lot to write home about with regards to FSU's pro day and it creating a lot of fanfare. There are other guys competing for spots in the league, Cam McDonald, Dylan Gibbons. I'm probably forgetting somebody. I apologize. But, Jamie Robinson's a headliner. It's not like next year's pro day for FSU where it should be stocked full of talent.
Yeah. So I'm looking at our running list right now. We don't have anyone for the midweek visits for practices, but that obviously will happen. Florida State will host guys, and we'll know about it beforehand and post it on Almost 24/7. But for this upcoming weekend, the weekend of April 1st, 2 very important defensive back targets are making it back to campus. 3-star defensive back Kevin Levy. They're actually related. I think they're cousins. And then 3-star defensive back Ricky Knight, the third. Both high priorities for Florida State. Kevin Levy is a speedster out of West Palm Beach, and then Ricky Knight attends the Benjamin School, also in North Palm Beach, where Jordan Travis played his high school football. So both guys that are really important prospects for Florida State that will make it to campus this weekend. And then obviously we'll update you guys as we get the visitors that are expected in for Tuesday and Thursday as well.
Yeah, big fan of Ricky Knight. He was outstanding at the Under Armour Orlando event, which I went to. I believe he just won MVP for defensive back at Rivals South Florida event this weekend. He does that pretty consistently. He's a South Florida Fire kid that's kind of emerged since January and caught fire and been very popular in recruiting circles. He's smart. He's competitive. He's got a lot of those attributes and traits that I think FSU likes. His measurements aren't off the radar like some other guys on the defensive backboard, but I think there's a lot to like about Ricky Knight. And Kevin's a very talented track athlete type of kid, very good speed, also a good player in his own right. So those two will be fun. I'm sure the list will expand drastically. Not expecting anybody on Monday as of right now, about 11 a.m. in the morning. But, I expect kids to be here for each of the practices on Tuesday and Thursday. They've been pretty continually open for business since March began.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Anything else to add, Zachary?
I think we're all good. Bring us home.
All right. So for Chris, for Zach, for Brendan, who went and got his haircut, thanks for listening. And as always, if you got questions, feel free to ask them on the boards. If you haven't joined us, we got the Battles End promo going on right now. There are also just general 24/7 promos always going on as well. Thanks to Chattanooga Whiskey for sponsoring us, even though my cohort stole my bottle. Thank you to the Battles End, as I already mentioned. Thank you to the Turner Group, as always. And I think that's about it. Have a great week, everybody. And we'll probably talk to you later in the week as well.